Welcome to a Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for dramofoutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and anything interesting that falls between. This is podcast episode 167, and we are in week 3 of the Fiery Cross read-along. Woo! We are covering chapters 3 and 4. Now, one thing I did want to put out there is I know reading this laboriously slow is really not necessary for you. You read at your own pace, and you could have finished Fiery Cross by now since we started the read-along. However, if you do want to participate in the podcast and leave me notes or comments or ask questions, etc., then after you read the chapters, make notes for yourself. Write things down of interest and of note. And then when I post the podcast that has to do with that chapter or chapters, then you'll be able to go back and reflect and participate. It's that simple. Okay. So chapter 3 is Bilious Humours, and chapter 4 is Wedding Gifts. I'm not doing the summary this week because these are some pretty condensed chapters. This is where at the end of Drums of Autumn, they had several days of occurrences that we just got a little glimpse into at the gathering. And then as we get into day 5, it is like coming to a sudden stop in traffic, and now we're going on this really, really detailed, slow-moving traffic crawl. It's the best way that I can put it. We are still on Mount Helicon in North Carolina, late October 1770, with cool gray and wet weather. So it's interesting because the weather is quite Scottish. So all the people from Scotland should feel right at home in this drizzly, dreek weather. Okay. What are bilious humours? Like, what does that mean? I'm sure you've heard it before, and this is something that has come up in the book or in the books before. According to medicinenet.com, bilious is the adjective for bile. Bilious has 3 meanings. It means of or relating to bile. By extension, bilious means suffering from liver dysfunction and especially excessive secretions of bile. And further, by extension, it is indicative of a peevish, ill-natured disposition. The word bilious goes back to the old belief that there were 4 bodily humours: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. And these 4 humours determine a person's temperament. Bilious was the personality type associated with an excess of yellow bile. It derives from the French word bilieux, which in turn came from bili, the Latin term for bile. There you go on that. And then there's a really interesting one that I loved when I found it. It is actually on the National Institute of Health under their History of Medicine, and it is the World of Shakespeare's Humours. The 4 humours were part of Shakespearean cosmology inherited from the ancient Greek philosophers Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Galen. So there could be melancholic, and this is black bile. The element was earth, the season was winter, age, old age, qualities are cold and dry, the organ, spleen, and the planet was Saturn. Phlegmatic, the humor was phlegm, the element was water, the season was autumn, age, maturity, qualities cold and moist, the organ was the brain, and the planet was the moon. Choleric, which is bilious, what we're covering in this chapter. The humor is yellow bile, the element is fire, the season is summer, the age is childhood. Qualities hot and dry, organ gallbladder, planet Mars. And then the last one is sanguine, which is blood. Element is air, the season is spring, the age is adolescence, qualities hot and moist, The organ is heart, and the planet is Jupiter. I put a link in for this National Institute of Health history link. It is really fascinating, and it goes through and explains this. And the idea that this came into medicine is fascinating to me. So we have to look at the 4 humors having differences of age, gender, emotions, and disposition. And it changed with the seasons, time of day, and with the lifespan of the human. So heat stimulated action, cold depressed it. So here's a sentence that would explain it. The young warrior's choler gave him courage, but phlegm produced cowards. Youth was hot and moist, age cold and dry. Men as a sex were hotter and drier than women. It's super fascinating. So there's that little tidbit for you to start with. Okay. This 2 chapters that we're sitting in really gave me a lot to go and research. So this is where I get to put on my happy midwife hat and being a lover of medicine and science and tradition on top of it. So it's really fascinating. There are several characters that are named in these chapters, but we really only primarily see 5. 6 if we count Dr. MacLeod's or Apothecary MacLeod's patient. So really 5 characters are active in these 2 chapters. We have Claire, Brianna, Murray MacLeod, the apothecary practicing near Claire, and Roger and Duncan Innes. So I happen to really like these 2 chapters. I mean, they are very, very detailed. I'm not going to cover every single detail. There are certain things that I've bookmarked and highlighted that I think are important. So what's the point of Claire in these 2 chapters? Well, really, she's only in chapter 3. And she is going about setting up her morning clinic hours so she can see all the patients who plan on seeing her on this last day of the gathering. So she's going through all her motions, right? And getting everything set up and set out. And as an extension of this, and I'm going to go into the of note section, that's where we're going to talk in detail about it. After Claire gets her clinic set up and she's going through the motions, she and Brianna are discussing sexually transmitted infections, or rather, what used to be called venereal disease, specifically syphilis. And the name has gone through a transformation over the years. When I was growing up, they were called sexually transmitted diseases. And in recent years, that has been changed to sexually transmitted infection because some of these infections are bacterial-based and some are viral-based. The ones that are viral-based cannot be cured, so to speak. Some things medicines can put someone into remission or quell the virus, like herpes, when it comes up. HIV has many different medicines now that can be thrown at a person in a form of a cocktail to really bring down illness and bring about a very normal lifespan, unlike it was even 10 years ago. There's actually a new medication out that is supposed to prevent the spread of HIV. So if somebody has multiple partners, they're engaging in higher risk behavior, if they know that they are at risk, they can take a daily medication that will reduce the risk of HIV, which is amazing. That is like huge, considering the fact that I was a child in the 70s and came into teenagehood right before the 80s. Having this is just an incredible leap forward in just a small amount of time, actually. So most sexually transmitted infections can be, quote, cured with antibiotics. Some are becoming antibiotic resistant. The other virus of note to talk about is HPV. And it tends to run its course in a matter of years. Generally, within about 5 years, it will do its thing. However, it can wreak havoc along the way in various clinical ways, and it is really important to guard yourself against it. Okay, so they talk about that, and then they talk about contraception of the day, and then they move into when patient scare. Yes, MacLeod is a patient scare. Wow, that must have been Freudian. We move into when patient care is beginning. Brianna comes into the action because she wants time with her mother. She is ostensibly helping at the clinic, but that's not really her thing. I mean, it's okay. It doesn't really bother her, but that's not what she wants to do. But she knows that this is a time where her mother is a captive audience as they are setting up, waiting for patients to come, and she can have deep, detailed discussions with her before people get there. And this is Brianna's, real wedding day to Roger as well. So she's got some questions and concerns that she wants to cover. And she also performs this really fantastic prayer. I'm going to actually read the prayer. It's lengthy, but I love it so hard. This blessing. She's amazing and very smart. Next, we see MacLeod, who's the apothecary who's practicing current day medicine of the time. The whole phlegm and the humours and the stuff I read to you in the beginning. And it frustrates Claire to no end because in this time period, there is no germ theory. We don't understand the different ways in which disease or illness is transmitted, whether it be by water, air, food, direct contact, all the different ways that we can get an illness, or things like liver disease, heart disease, and have specific things that as we know them as now, and we could separate like different types of respiratory illnesses that killed people or different types of heart disease that killed people, etc., which they didn't have names for all the things that we do, and they were kind of categorized into one thing. And MacLeod's practice style frustrates Claire to no end, but what can she do? She can't fix it. Can she would really cure the patient or meaningfully help this patient have a better quality of life? Probably not. So that's how the interaction goes between Brianna, Claire, and MacLeod and his patient. So that's really the bulk of chapter 3. And there's a lot of interaction between mother and daughter, and then practitioner to practitioner. There's a little bit that we get to see. So in the next chapter, all we see is Roger and Duncan Innes interacting. I mean, there's a shopkeeper or two, but really it's about those two characters, how they connect to each other, something that's important, and what they're both doing, because it's supposed to be both of their wedding days, right? Okay. I love that. So Roger is really struggling with practicality versus romanticism, and he has a pretty keen, harsh realization during this process. Duncan Innes is seeking out Roger's counsel on something because they have a commonality of religion that, of course, Roger didn't know about until now. And he's also en route looking for a wedding gift for Jocasta. All right. So what are the things that are of note in all these interactions between these characters? And why is it important that we're seeing these interactions? Well, it's interesting to me as we're kind of peeling back the layer of Claire and Brianna's relationship that Brianna is definitely somebody with that stiff upper lip. She really holds close to the vest until she's ready to speak about something. Now, I think her mother is that way. I mean, we always see Claire talking to Jamie, but Claire didn't really interact and tell Frank everything once she went back. I mean, some, but not most. And Joe Abernathy was her best friend, and she talked to him, but it really wasn't totally easy for her to tell him everything either. She's very private, and she's very internal. And Frank was like that as well. So Brianna got the double whammy of these British parents who in many ways kind of kept close to the vest. And she's seeing a whole new side of her mother that she's really never, ever seen. She hasn't interacted with this Claire until she went back to the 1700s. I mean, imagine waking up tomorrow and having your parent that you thought you knew really well and all the, really who they were and how they responded to the world be different when you see them in a different environment. I mean, I know for a lot of children, when you become an adult and the relationship transitions to an adult relationship, though they're still your parents and you're still their children, that it often will bring this awakening on the child's behalf that their parents are actual people, right? So all of a sudden, your mother is just not a mother. Your mother is a woman. She's a lover, if she has a lover. She has her own interests. She may have passions. She may have hobbies. She might really hate doing certain tasks she has done her whole life, your whole life, because she needed to. She may have hated cooking and cleaning and doing things. My ex-mother-in-law, rest in peace now, she was a lovely, lovely woman. She was also very introverted and quiet, and she really had a way of things that she liked them. She was such a kind soul. But it was really funny because I met her after she had been widowed, and I was, a middle teenager. And I remember her telling me after having a husband and 5 children that she's like, I hate cooking. I don't like cooking for people. I hate it. I hate having to do certain things. And she did them her whole life and in her marriage because they had to be done. But she was more than thrilled to be able to stop doing those things that she didn't like to do and just to be her own person and to find out what she loved. And she went to work at the library because the woman was a bibliophile. I mean, hardcore. Her face was always in a book. And to me, it was so great to be 16, 17, 18, 20 years old to get to see her transformation in middle age into who she wanted to be, who she believed she was. It was awesome because I think at the time, my goodness, 49. She was my age exactly when I met her. So 40, no, she was 1 year older. So she was 52 when I met her. And so thinking about that is fascinating to me. That she was coming into her own at the age I am today. Gosh. I'm going to have to think about that some more later. But I got to see that transition for her as a middle-aged widow and what it meant to her. And so I really got to know her very differently than her other adult children, because I was with her and around her all the time while this was going on. So imagine for her other children what it was like to see their mother and maybe not recognize some of her behaviors in a very short time and think, wait, did that really bother you when we were growing up? She was such a sweet-souled introvert. I cannot imagine how emotionally exhausted she was, as much as she loved her children to bits and pieces. how tired she was at the end of the day and how hard some of that must have been on her. Because I don't think she got a lot of recharge time. Nothing like we might be able to carve out today. But that was her books. She read everything and devoured it. So imagine from Brianna's perspective of really seeing her mother in a completely different element and seeing a fullness of person, seeing her mother as a lover and a friend and a wife, and really see her working with patients. Brianna didn't get to see that. Claire was primarily a surgeon. All her work was at the hospital. So now Brianna's getting to see her mother clinically interact with people and to really see that conflict in her mother. Get to see her being a wife in a completely different way than she was to Brianna's daddy, Frank. And on the flip side of that, seeing Claire still getting used to having this adult daughter. Getting used to this daughter become a woman, right? And to be married, and she sees her mothering her child and doing these things. In a very short time, Brianna has gone from child to full-blown adult, and they were without each other for 2.5 years. So to see this transition and to interact with her as a peer is really beautiful. And I hope that all of our transitions from child to adult or parent welcoming your children into adulthood could be like this, where you get to feel each other out and you get to change your relationship and adapt it into what it's supposed to be as adults, because it is supposed to change. I now have 3 of my children are adults and my youngest is 17, and the 17-year-old really gets treated much more like an adult because he's close to it, and we have 3 other adults, and that's just the mode that we're in, right? But to have that transition, to have them still need us in particular ways, but also us having to go through the action of opening our hands and allowing them really into their adult decisions, some of which we would caution them gravely against, right? But they're adults. And so we're learning how to reparent as our children no longer need us in the same way, though they fully still need us, trust me. But I was telling somebody about that the other day, and that it's really beautiful being able to know what my adult children need, most of them, and to have our interactions be maturing and changing, and that all of us are open to those possibilities, whatever they are, while remaining a close family. So this is what I see in this writing. Like, Brianna is, kind of very into herself and doesn't share everything like Claire and like Frank, but she knows she can tell her mother anything when she's ready. She knows she can come to her and ask the really difficult questions, even if they're hard and she might be embarrassed. And she's really being vulnerable with her mother. And from the earlier books, once Claire became a doctor, Brianna was super close to Frank. When that transition was made, they were very close. And Frank really did a lot of the nurturing and child rearing because of Claire's long hours. Claire was there. It was just a different relationship than it is now. So Claire really gets to be the best mommy she can be now. Like, fully. She was the best mommy that she could be, but it definitely, Brianna was a daddy's girl. Okay. So I love that aspect of this. We're really seeing this relationship through their eyes and how it's shifting. I think that's really important. Okay. So we have this clinic set up for the day, and it's supposed to be the last day of the gathering. Roger and Brianna are getting married in the evening. So are supposed to Duncan and Jocasta. So they're going about the business, and we get to see Claire's ritual of what she does, how she's wiping things down, she's cleaning everything, she's putting boiled water into distilled alcohol so she can have a means of cleaning. And because she knows, since they don't have what we would have in her time in the mid 20th century, we don't have antibiotics and anesthesia and all these things, that she has to provide the cleanest possible care and the cleanest possible instruments. And knowing that she can still get some diseases, that she has to be really careful for herself as well. But one thing to point out while they're setting this clinic up, and this is where we get into Claire's head, and because she's not always talking, that she says that she had to learn detachment in a field hospital, which is really helping her in this time, because in the field during the war, you had limited ability to do things, even if you could do them 50 miles away at a hospital. You're not doing them on the ground. You're just trying to do your very best, and you may not be able to save everybody, and that's what you do. And she also knew that she couldn't really help anyone if her emotions took over. It is really difficult to see hardship and not be affected by it. Claire is totally affected by it. That's why she does the things that she does. And I don't know if you've noticed in the books, but she doesn't ask for payment. She just does the work. And people pay her in all sorts of different things, but she doesn't ask for monetary payment. She doesn't even ask for a barter. She knows that people will somehow pay her for her services, but she never asks for a penny, a shilling, a halfpence. She doesn't ask for any monetary gain when she's working. And she began her medical practice in Boston, where it was fee for services. So I think it's fascinating that she just wants to use her skill, and she has a deep heart for people. We can see that. This isn't about her elevating herself or giving herself excess status. This is who she is. She can't not be a doctor. So we just see them wiping down the stools, the boxes, everything else, tidying up and getting ready. Okay? And how the discussion begins about syphilis, because Brianna is looking for an end, and the conversation is that she saw a little boy who had deformities the previous day, and Claire tells her that it was from congenital syphilis. Now, I did put a link in for you on this topic, and I'm let me see if I can find it for you. Okay, so I went onto the March of Dimes website because it's just really thorough and easy, right? So there can be a loss of pregnancy. There are several types of disorders that a baby can get, but mainly the baby can have massive deformities or even die right after delivery. And it's very obvious when you look at kind of what their face looks like and what other deformities that they might have. And congenital just means it's present at birth. There's that. And Claire, they're having this conversation and they're sort of taking the very long route around. And finally, we get to the point where Brianna is worried that she could have it because of Stephen Bonnet. That's a really fair question. It's interesting that she didn't ask her mother that the entirety of her pregnancy. And she and Roger have been living as husband and wife, so they've been intimate. Jemmy looks like a totally normal baby, unlike the child that she saw the prior day. So she's having some concerns that she could have something that is asymptomatic and it's not showing up, because oftentimes in women, you may not have any symptoms at all until it's late. And if we do a callback to Gaylis Abernathy in Jamaica, Claire believed in the books that Gaylis had advanced syphilis and that she was becoming mentally unstable because of it, which is very, very fair for her to say. And I also brought up Medicine of Colonial North America from Harvard, looking at diseases of colonial America. So I have plenty of links in here that we can look at. It's fascinating to me, absolutely, all the different things. And in England in the 18th century, it is calculated that 8% of the population had syphilis. That is crazy. That's a crazy number, I got to tell you. Okay, so the next thing that we finally got to talk about between Claire and Brianna, it's kind of painstaking to get there, is contraception. And Claire's going through all these things in her head as she's like to do, like, why would Brianna not want to have a baby? That's a way for Roger to feel connected. But then would Roger then not want Jemmy? I mean, Roger made a blood oath. Stop worrying about Roger. He's a good dude. But in this talk about contraception, and I'm going to get to ancient contraception in just a second, Claire has this really incredible thought process. And she realizes that, like her, there's a parallel between her and her daughter. And this is something I don't know if I ever paid attention to before. It was a nice bit of writing. But that if Brianna only has one child, like Claire, when the child is fully grown, Brianna could choose to return to the 20th century with Roger, could choose to return to her own time. And Jemmy would have a life. He would have a family in the 18th century. That would be his world. They don't know if Jemmy can travel or not at this point. So Claire has this moment of clarity that her daughter could be facing the same decision she had. That is super heavy. That is super heavy for her to sit there and look at her daughter, see her as an adult, see her as an autonomous human being, and see her as a woman who may have different thoughts about staying in the 18th century. Like, she didn't go there meaning to stay. Roger didn't go there meaning to stay, but now there's this child. And she certainly didn't mean to get pregnant in the 1700s. So that is pretty incredible when you look at this writing, like the importance of it. The other thing that came about in here, just as a quick side note, was that Claire did make up silver nitrate and put it in the baby's eyes at birth just in case Brianna had syphilis, because it would cause blindness in babies. If the mother had it and the baby didn't, like if there was an active infection. So she took the remedy that was used in the 1940s, 1950s for it just in case. But she didn't say anything, which is very interesting. So they're just kind of going through and discussing what's what. And I love Claire's thought process because she's running through the whole thing, all of it, the whys, the hows, and then she settles on her final thought. Now, is Brianna really thinking that? We don't know. We only see Claire's side of the equation in this. I have put a link into the post notes for different types of contraception. And the main thing that has come up a couple of times is that there's a seed that a woman can take every day and it will prevent conception. The woman's herb, okay? And that is something that a thread we need to follow through. But there is a family of herbs that are well known for contraception, or at least to help contraception. And we have fennel, it's in the parsley, celery, dill, coriander, cilantro. So we're not exactly sure which one it is yet, okay? But that has been widely used historically in order to prevent, as well as what Claire had talked about prior when we talked about the emmenagogues to bring on bleeding immediately as like a morning after sort of pill. And what I think it might be is something called wild carrot seeds, which is the seeds of Queen Anne's lace. It's a cousin to fennel, and it has a long history as a contraceptive and abortifacient because it blocks the production of progesterone. And you have to have progesterone for a fertilized egg to implant and adhere. So what they think it is the silphium was reliable birth control, as the ancients had claimed. Because the compound, I don't know if it's pronounced ferujol, Ferujol. So this National Geographic link is actually very interesting and has quite a bit of information, like asafoetida. And I put in a couple other links as well because there's many that talk about it. And the family of herbs, I put links in for that as well that really explain. It's the umbel family of herbs. Umbelliferae. So there's a lot to it. And wise women have always known that there were ways to minimize risk of conception. Now, of course, again, the coitus interruptus was very common, but that doesn't always work. It has a rate of like poorly used condoms. I don't recommend it. And I actually know women who use specific oils today, just like in the books, where they would use a sponge and soak it in specific oils and use that as contraception very effectively, along with natural family planning. So there's really now a return to a lot of the parts of nature that have helped us before. And there's many women who really want to have better control over their fertility without having to use artificial hormones. And I totally understand that because artificial hormones can interact with individual women very poorly and cause all sorts of horrible side effects. And you can still get pregnant on most of them. Except, well, you can even get pregnant after you have a tubal ligation, though it's very, very rare. But it happens. So they really want to have a lot more say and in their fertility process, which I think is really fascinating. So I put a whole bunch of links in there on that. One of the parts that I really love is Claire's going through this mental gymnastics, and she's thinking about Brianna growing up and her leaving. I think that's where this comes from, to Brianna never wanting to leave Jemmy, but she could, like once he grew up and got married or something, right? I love when she finally opens up her chest. They have everything clean, okay? And she takes out the supplies, and the supplies she has are scissors, a probe, forceps. They're the small forceps. They're not childbirth forceps. Alcohol, a scalpel, bandages, and they're usually linen bandages that they use. Tooth pliers, suture needles, ointments, salves, washes, purges. So she has everything. Like Ipecac is a purge to make you vomit. So she's doing this while continuing to think about Brianna and what she might be doing. And then her first patient comes up who has a nasty hangover. So she's dealing with that. Like a raw egg and ipecac. Ugh. I mean, it will work. You'd barf and you might feel better. I'd settle for some spicy food and a soda instead. And some ibuprofen, which she doesn't have, but she has willow bark. But anyway, so now her clinic is open and we kind of get to see where it's at, and that Murray MacLeod shows up next to her, right? And, before we get there, back up. Okay, so cultural views on pregnancy is also of note. And Claire went on to explain to Brianna. Claire explained to Brianna that the Tuscarora, the Mohawk, that they believe basically the man's seed overcomes the woman in order to get pregnant. It's a very different process, though it's kind of true. It's just how they look at it is different clinically than how we would look at it. And it has a spiritual element to it more than what our modern day version is. So there's a discussion of how the cultural views on pregnancy and then the seed, the woman's herb, will not allow the man to overtake the woman and she'll get pregnant. And so now we can move on to Murray MacLeod having a patient. He's like 10 feet away from her, and Claire can see that this man is so highly jaundiced, which means there's probably advanced liver disease, very ill, and how Claire describes him as a stout gentleman whose red spongy nose and flabby jowls gave testimony to a life of alcoholic excess. And he's going to bleed this guy. And so she's talking to Brianna, like off to the side, it's liver disease, like she's whispering. Oh no, it says she takes no pains to lower her voice. That's funny. And MacLeod said loudly back to her, Bilious Humours. And he snaps out his phlegm. An excess of humours clear as day. And Claire believes it's cirrhosis of the liver. And then Murray MacLeod, like we talked about earlier when I went over the humours, an impaction of the bile owing to an imbalance of the phlegm. Ha! And so Murray is glowering at Claire. He thinks she's bonkers. He doesn't know that she's using old medicine and new medicine combined. Like she's doing things in a way that makes old medicine more effective. Claire totally ignores MacLeod and pokes his patient and says, you have a hard mass just under the ribs on the right, don't you? Your piss is dark, and when you shit, it's black and bloody. Am I right? So she says this to MacLeod's patients, and this is totally super embarrassing to Brianna. Mother, is what she says to her. And so Brianna gets to be the adult in the scenario and asks her mother what she can do for cirrhosis. Nothing. Like she even knows that there's nothing Claire can do. So she backs off of Murray's patient, and she had no alternative treatment to offer. I mean, bleeding the guy wasn't going to make a difference, but not bleeding the guy wasn't going to make a difference. This guy had advanced liver disease. So she backs away from it, and she says in her mind, one supposed one could consider alcohol a humor after all. After all, the folk drinking Jamie's whiskey last night had evidently found it hilarious. So this is where Brianna comes in this exchange, because Claire wants so hard to teach this guy something and give him the proper diagnosis, but she can't fix it. So Brianna's like, why? You got to cut your losses, right? And Brianna just takes advantage of the moment and tells MacLeod that there's a charm. It sharpens the blade and eases the flow of the humours. Let me show you. And she grabs the fleam from MacLeod's hand and turns to the surgery fire where there's boiling water hanging, right? And here's what she says. I'm going to read it because I love this little bit. You could probably forward a couple of minutes if you don't want to hear it. In the name of Michael, wielder of swords, defender of souls, she intoned. I trusted that taking the name of St. Michael in vain was not actual blasphemy, or if it was, that Michael would not object in a good cause. The men laying the fire had stopped to watch, as had a few people coming to the surgery. She raised the fleam and made a large, slow sign of the cross with it, looking from side to side to be sure she had the attention of all the onlookers. So Brianna's a showman like Jamie. She did. They were agog. Towering over most of the gawkers, blue eyes narrowed in concentration. She reminded me strongly of Jamie in some of his more bravura performances. I could only hope she was as good at it as he was. Bless this blade for the healing of your servant, she said, casting her eyes up to heaven and holding the fleam above the fire in the manner of a priest offering the Eucharist. Bubbles were rising through the water, but it hadn't quite reached the boil. Bless its edge for the drawing of blood, for the spilling of blood, for the letting of poison from the body of your most humble petitioner. Bless the blade, bless the blade, bless the blade in the hand of your humble servant. Thanks be to God for the brightness of the metal. Thanks be to God for the repetitious nature of Gaelic prayers, I thought cynically. Thanks be to God, the water was boiling. She lowered the short curved blade to the surface of the water, glowered significantly at the crowd, and declaimed, Let the cleansing of the waters from the side of our Lord Jesus be upon this blade. She plunged the metal into the water and held it into the steam, rising over the wooden casing reddened her fingers. She lifted the fleam and transferred it hastily to her other hand, raising it into the air as she surreptitiously waggled the scalded hand behind her. May the blessing of Michael, defender from demons, be on this blade and on the hand of its wielder, to the health of the body, to the health of the soul. Amen. Woohoo! Good job, Bree. She stepped forward and presented the flame ceremoniously to Murray, handle first. Murray, no fool, gave me a look in which keen suspicion was mingled with a reluctant appreciation for my daughter's theatrical abilities. Don't touch the blade, I said, smiling graciously. It will break the charm. Oh, and you repeat the charm each time you use the blade. It has to be done with the water boiling, mind. So I love how Brianna created a moment to use the culture of the day, inspired by the religion and how everything was done and viewed, to bring modern medical practice and creating a more antiseptic, safer blade for the use on people. Because you can't fix everything. Sometimes it's about making some progress and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Okay. I love that. And Claire reflects on the fact that she can't do anything except tell the guy to abstain from alcohol, right? Which is not going to happen. And she also reflects on the fact that Brianna had saved this man from a potentially nasty blood infection. And it was used as a vehicle to protect MacLeod's future patients. Even though Claire felt guilty for not being able to do any more, that's a lot in that time period. And she goes back to that principle that she had learned as a nurse on the battlefields. Treat the patient in front of you. That's all you can do. You can't look forward, you can't look backwards, you can't look side to side. You treat who's in front of you to the best of your ability, whether limited or not. That's what you do. And she handed an ointment to a girl with a nettle rash. And don't scratch. So I love this chapter because it gives us just that peek into not only Claire's practice style, but to how she and her daughter interact in their relationship. And I love her frustration. And Brianna knowing her mother so well that she's like, Mom, stop it. Mommy, knock it off. Mother. How many of us have heard that? So many. As we move into wedding gifts, chapter 4, this is all about Roger, what's going on in Roger's mind, and about Duncan Innes. Again, it's their wedding day. And so right now we're thinking it's probably 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe 10, and they're going to do clinic for a couple of hours. So now it's mid to late morning at our best guess. So it's still crummy outside, and Roger is heading toward kind of the tents where people have things for sale. Love that. It's like going to a Celtic festival. You go to the tents and you buy beautiful things. And he calls them the Tinker's Wagons because he wants to buy a wedding gift for Brianna. So I looked it up, and on a quick 3 or 4 different searches on keywords, didn't really find the premise for brides and grooms giving each other a gift, but it's still considered very commonplace and usual for a bride and groom to give each other a gift on their wedding day. And it can be anything from a letter to a piece of jewelry to whatever you want it to be. But it's something that is encouraged, and it's considered good wedding day etiquette. So Roger's complication in this is he knows that Brianna is fiercely practical. Like, there is no way Jamie can get Claire anything froofy or fussy. It's just not her. I mean, outside of the wedding ring he gave her, not a lot. Like, the medicine box almost made her cry. Getting her tools makes, clinical tools makes her super happy. Like, or getting her seeds or plants, things like that. So that's just how she goes through the world. Like, she doesn't want fussy stuff. Claire's not one for doing all the things, right? So he's trying to decide what to get her, and he's having this internal struggle between getting her something practical and getting her something romantic. Because Brianna's also not foofy. But, so he's going through his own sort of mental gymnastics, and he really thinks he wants to put his own ring on her finger when they make vows, but her grandfather Brian's ring was already given to her by Jamie to wear, the cabochon ruby. And I did put a link to what a cabochon ruby is in the post, and it's really a highly polished jewel. And there are specific ones that are considered very coveted over others. And she doesn't want him to buy another ring. She already has one, but it really bothers him not to have a ring from himself to her. But then he continues and thinks, okay, what about a painted chamber pot? Could you imagine giving your intended a chamber pot? It would end up on his head, I'm pretty sure. Maybe after it was filled. But then he has this memory that is so cute and endearing. And it's of a woman named Mrs. Abercrombie, a staid and practical matron of Reverend Wakefield's congregation. She arrived at the manse in hysterics one evening in the midst of supper, saying that she had killed her husband, and whatever should she do? So the Reverend left Mrs. Abercrombie in the care of his then housekeeper, while he and Roger, a teenager, had hastened to the Abercrombie residence to see what had happened. And they'd found Mr. Abercrombie on the floor of his kitchen, fortunately still alive, though groggy and bleeding profusely from a minor scalp wound, occasioned by his having been struck by the new electric steam iron, which he had presented to his wife on the occasion of their 23rd wedding anniversary. So Mrs. Abercrombie whacked him in the head because he got her a practical gift. And the husband had said, "But she said the old one scorched the tea towels." I myself love a practical gift if it's for me to use. I don't want a vacuum for my birthday because we all use it. But if it's a practical gift for me, then I'm totally down with it. I also like earrings, and books, of course. So Roger is remembering this, and he comes to the conclusion that pragmatic Brie might be, but this was their wedding. Better, worse, death do us part. He'd go for romantic, or as romantic as he could manage on 1 shilling 3 pence. So that was a good memory that conjured up in his brain to tell him, no, don't do it. But as he's heading toward the tents, and we're going to stop here for a second on his quest, Duncan Innes shows up wanting to talk to him. And Duncan's also going to the tinker's tent with him. So Duncan approaches Roger, telling him that MacDoo said that Roger's father was a minister. And Roger says, yes, or at least my real father was killed and my mother's uncle adopted me. It was him was the minister. Roger's father was actually a pilot. And he wasn't sure why he made the distinction to Duncan, but he had. And then Duncan says, "But you will have been Presbyterian yourself then." "I did hear MacDoo speak of it." I couldn't help it. I had to throw a little Scots in there. And Roger said yes, he was. It turns out that Duncan has a secret. Duncan Innes is also a Presbyterian like Roger. And he's got this great problem. He wants to know if he should be telling Jocasta before they get married that he's not Catholic. Well, they're not going to be having children. So why would he have to be baptized Catholic? So they kind of go through this whole conversation. And Jamie doesn't know. Jocasta doesn't know. But since there weren't going to be children, it's probably fine. Okay? And Duncan tells Roger that they went to see the priest, and he asked Roger if Jamie made Roger get baptized Romish, if he had to get baptized Catholic. And Duncan does not want this. Duncan's already been baptized or christened, and so everybody says it's fine. So Roger's like, yeah, let me think about it as they're walking. And he doesn't really think at this point, because the wedding is not going to be a mass, but only a marriage service, that it's fine. Like, do you take this woman? Do you take this man, rich or poor? All of that. Marriage. Okay. So they've kind of figured that part out. It's probably not important to what's going on in this situation right now. But then the other issue that comes up is that Duncan is marrying far above his class. That still matters in many social circles today. So if somebody's from a wealthy family in the Western world and they're going to marry somebody from a poor or a middle-class family, sometimes the parents, grandparents, siblings, everybody gets very upset. And they presume that the person marrying into the wealthier family is a gold digger, whether they're male or female. This is a big deal. But at this time period, it's a very big deal. And in many cultures around the world, classes don't really cross at all. You marry within your station, and that's that, no matter what. And it's pretty amazing what we have now, but it's still a subject of contention for many families and many cultures. And Roger comes to the conclusion that he's the same way. He's the same as Duncan. Because Jocasta wanted to make Brianna her heir. That's a ton of money. Duncan's not going to be the heir. He's just helping her out. And they're getting married. It's a political marriage. And Jamie, how many acres of land does he have? How many people work under him? I mean, so Roger's basically coming penniless to this arrangement where Brianna could be considered potentially very wealthy and Jamie a man of wealth, right? So it's pretty daunting for him. And the other part of that comes into play is that he just realized this, but everybody else has been talking about it. Everybody else knows he's shooting out of his class. Even though we know that's not the case, and he was a professor at a university. He comes from good stock. He's well learned. But that doesn't matter in this time period. He can't prove any of that, can he? He literally has nothing in comparison. The clothes on his back, a couple of, bits of coins in his pocket, and his name. No land, no family to speak of, no money. So that is a very, very big deal culturally at that time period. So he thinks that everybody's probably been gossiping about him this whole time. He's probably right. But he got that 20th century mindset until Duncan brought it up. He was cool. They were in love. It's fine. Nope. So Roger gets to be the gold digger in this scenario. So they end up at the Tinker's wagons. And Roger thinks that now that they've talked about things, that Duncan's going to go on his way. But Duncan goes and buys Jocasta a beautiful piece of fabric. He's going to make a sachet out of it. And he gets her velvet. He's getting her something lovely. And I love what the exchange between him and the shopwoman is. Because he asks for a yard of velvet. A yard. That's a lot of velvet. And he says that good quality, color doesn't matter. And the text says, the woman's eyebrows lifted. Even in his best clothes, Duncan would strike no one as a dandy. He's also not froofy. But she turned without comment and began to rootle through her diminished stock. And he asks Roger if Claire has more lavender left, and he says she does. And so he's trying to figure out what the heck Duncan is doing. And so Duncan is getting this gift because Jocasta gets migraines and can't sleep when she has them. It's her visual stuff. She gets bad headaches. And he thought he would make her a lavender pillow. That is the sweetest thing ever. And Roger thinks in sickness and in health. And he gets to reflect on the idea that even marriage is not made of passion, that may be made of circumstance and need, can be kind and generous and considerate. And Duncan Innes is a considerate man. So he's getting this purchase and going to go have Lizzie sew it up. And now he's trying to figure out what the heck to do. And he keeps going back to that cabochon ring on her finger. And it bothers him. And here's what he said. True, Jamie had given him the ring, but that didn't make it his to give in turn. And he wanted very suddenly and very badly to give Brianna something truly of his own. So he made his decision. And he knew what size ring she wore. And he goes and finds a ring. It was cheap, made of braided strands of copper and brass. It would undoubtedly turn her finger green in minutes. So much better, he thought, handing over his money. Whether she wore it all the time or not, she would be marked as his. It's really funny because I don't see it that way. I don't view me wearing a wedding ring as showing that I'm property. And I don't think he really thinks it either. But my husband is like, yeah, it's proof that you have ownership over me. Like, I know he doesn't mean it in the legalistic way. But he's like, yeah, I'm taken. I got a woman. He's like, here's proof. So it's interesting why we would wear a wedding ring, what the symbolism behind it is, and how I think it can differ person to person. And yes, anybody who saw the green on her finger would know that she had a husband. I have lots of clients who have their wedding band tattooed on their finger because either they don't like jewelry, they're sensitive to jewelry, they have a job that it's dangerous for them to wear jewelry. My husband has to take his off sometimes and put it on his key ring because it's unsafe when he reaches his hand into equipment that he's working on. And yeah, I would rather him take it off. But I know several people who wear them, or they have sensory issues. And some people actually wear the spinner rings or the ones that are made of silicone or some other product. And the last thing that Roger thinks is, for this reason shall a woman leave her father's house and cleave unto her husband, and the two shall be one flesh. So Roger's in a marrying state of mind. So it's interesting because Duncan Innes, as we've learned in these books, I'm sorry we don't have him in the show, because I find him just to be so sweet, and he becomes such a pivotal, important character in the books, that he doesn't speak a lot. Remember in Voyager when, what was he, constipated? And he was so embarrassed to come and talk to Claire. Oh my gosh, on the ship because they were just eating hardtack and didn't have good food. But he's been this character who's been consistently there. And he actually got blood illness. And they had to cut his arm off in order to save it when he was injured. So, to save him, so he didn't die of infection. But he's become this like steadfast character who is loyal and kind, and he's just with them all the way. And it makes me look forward to his interactions with Roger in the future to see if there are any. And I look forward to seeing how Roger presents this ring to Brianna when it's time. Because, again, longest day ever. So you probably have 8 hours of things that could happen before the wedding. Next week, we're doing chapters 5 and 6. And we shall see. Somehow, I got well over an hour on this. And I don't even know how. It's not a lot of material, but I tried to pull as many things out of it as possible. And I wonder how Jocasta will take the wedding gift from Duncan and how that will be seen. All right. So I do want to hear from you. What are your questions? What are your concerns? What are your thoughts? What do you want from this podcast? 719-425-9444. Or you can email to contact@adramofoutlander.com. And I do have a note from somebody from the last podcast. Let me pull it up. So Kathy Smick left a note on YouTube, and she said, interesting that the stone circles can tell you the position of sun, dates, times, like a calendar. Okay, that is just me rattling on. But I recall Roger uses it, and it has to do with surveying the property because of the war, the astrolabe. Yes, he's using it for surveying. I do not understand surveying. it is a skill set that is totally outside of my brain. I know what it is. I know how it works, and it still doesn't make sense to me. And then she brings up, because I said, will they not have a gathering? And she brings up, wow, no gathering. I bet that's why they skipped it in season 4. The entire last quarter of the book was ignored. It was like 5 chapters, so it was just a little bit. 5 or 6, 7 chapters. In Fiery Cross, how do you skip the Thief Taker and Breakfast Hillsborough stories? Unless you put it elsewhere. Okay, so there was an Entertainment Weekly with Lynette Rice, an interview this week, and Meryl and Tony were on it, and Meryl Davis said that they are doing The Gathering. So I presume that's going to be the first episode, but really a lot of this can be so truncated. I do not want like 4 episodes of The Gathering. And some of it, they've sort of taken out of sync already, and so we're going to have to see how they do it. But I think maybe that's when they'll probably do the Calling of the Clans and do a few parts of The Gathering that are really important. I don't know if they'll do some of the shenanigans that are coming up in the next few chapters. But we'll see. Because we don't know what characters are going to be on the ridge. We know maybe they're using The Gathering as the forum to gather all the people they're taking back to the ridge. I think that's what's going to happen. And they're going to be recruiting families to come with them. But we already know in the TV show that Jamie has to muster this militia, right? And that is a few chapters. I'm sorry, that's chapters we've already covered. So that's already out of sync. So that means they'll be getting families and mustering people. Like, we already know that has to happen. So it does make me wonder if the 67th Regiment is going to show up, or if it's even necessary, because the whole job of that was to talk about Hillsborough and the regulators. So they don't have to worry about having a Highland Regiment there. And that whole thing can be cut out because Jamie's already gotten that letter. So when they're at the gathering, he can do the other parts. So I think that's how they'll do it. I don't know. But this scene right here, I don't know if there's going to be the discussions that Claire had with Brianna. I don't know if it's important to moving this story forward in the TV show. Probably not. They probably will discuss birth control and that kind of thing because it's important to Brianna's storyline. But it could be very simple, just like she had the conversation with Marcelly. But I think they're going to cut out most of the side stories because it gives us interest into what's happening with people and what their lives are like, but it really doesn't, in a compelling way, move a television series forward. So we'll just have to see how that works, but at least they are doing The Gathering. My guess is that it will probably be the first episode, and then we'll get to move on, because we don't need chapters and chapters of The Gathering, I don't think. And we'll see. What do you think? If you watch the TV show, how do you think this will translate, or what we've read so far will translate in these first few chapters? Like I said, I did put a whole ton of links in the written post for you to look at and read and study. I find it fascinating looking at herbal contraception, and I have a PDF from a study on herbal contraception that if you email or leave me a voicemail with your email, I'd be happy to forward you the PDF. I downloaded it from the university I'm attending. So you can't really log into that link if I posted the link, but it's really interesting, all the different methods. Women are smart. Women were making papyrus tampons. Like, women are like crafty cookies. All through history, we have not settled because these are not men's issues. They are not going to help us with them. We had to figure stuff out on our own. I'm loving looking at this. Just like the other books I've done read-alongs for, it helps connect to the story in a completely different way. It brings dimension to small details. And I cut out so many details, and I still am sitting at an hour and, 15 minutes right now? So I don't think a lot of this might be in the story on the TV, like I said, but I like it in the book. But we're like only, let's see, we're how many chapters in to the longest day ever? 4? And we still haven't gotten through this day incomplete yet. Oh, Diana, you know how to weave a tale. Somebody was telling me that this was the book that she turned in that didn't have time to go back for copy editing, I believe, and that this part probably would have been edited down significantly. But it's what we have. It's what we're going from. But I'm very tired at this point, and it's not even lunchtime yet. Going through this. Okay. So, how can you support the podcast? Well, you can tell people about it. You can give me feedback. You can join Instagram or Twitter at Dram of Outlander to follow. You can have the website, go in and follow the website, and you'll get updates whenever posts are made. You can financially support the podcast. I would love to be able to produce some cute giveaways and have little shot glasses and t-shirts and stuff to do. And that helps me. And it also, right now, the financial support that I get from you fabulous listeners helps me maintain the goings-on behind the scenes of the website, of the podcast service, etc. This really is a labor of love for me, and it's something I do as a means of self-care because I love books, I love these people, and I'm so giddily happy to be with these characters like this again. I've missed them, and I've missed them since I finished the Drums of Autumn read-along, because these are like family members to me. I can't imagine life without them. And when the last book is written, hopefully we'll have a bunch of side stories and other books before Diana leaves this beautiful earth, and we will have lots and lots to go back through and read and evaluate and just keep close to our hearts. So financially, if you go to patreon.com/A-Dram-of-Outlander, you can do a small monthly offering as small as $1. Or if you want to make a one-time offering, just contact me through the email or phone number, and I will tell you how to do that. And I appreciate you so very much. And the other way you can support the podcast is to go into iTunes through Apple Podcasts and give me a rating. Every 5-star rating drives people to me through Apple Podcasts. You can go to your Stitcher, Google Play, any other way that you stream the podcast and go in and give me a review. That will help. And please come over to Facebook if you're on social media and join the Facebook group. It is closed, so you have to answer some questions, but it's fun. Great group of people. We barely have to moderate. There's like no nastiness hardly ever. Just really respectful, smart people. That's what I like. And we really get to look at the show and the books in just a cooperative way, which I really like. I'm about relationships. I'm a midwife. Doesn't that make sense? I'm all about relationship and creating community. Again, that's me as a midwife and as a human being. And I love the community that we've created. And thanks to Patricia and Jan, who helped me out with the admin, just make it a really great place to hang out. And people that, are fun people and respectful and kind and genuine. So I appreciate that. And I know you guys appreciate that who are part of it. And so I just want to invite you there. And of course, there's the Facebook page that you can like. But that content is totally driven by me because it's my page. I put stuff there all the time. But in order to interact with other people, you really need to become part of the group. So I thank you so much. And as every week, I appreciate you listening and coming back for more. We have a lot more weeks to go, something like 43, to get through this book. So until next time, Slán je va.